Text as people come in. It's good to have Judith back. Judith now has all of her powers, and now her dad has given her his powers too.
Your dad is giving me this.
He's given
powers.
his Torah powers.
His Torah powers.
You've been imbued with extra Torah power.
There are worse things.
No, I'm saying. I'm hoping. Yeah, we're going to read the story of Absalom today, the revolt. We read about him a little bit last week, but we're going to continue this drama today, and pretty dramatic. I'm gonna go get the other table. I'm gonna get the table. And welcome everyone. Good morning. It's good to see you. I'm gonna get the table.
Want help?
I think that's what I got. Thank you. Good. Pretty late. Oh, I gave you a book, Mary.
Yeah.
So that's it. That's your estimate. There's a reason why it should be. Oh, I thought maybe you'd be interested in it.
Well, it looks good.
Oh.
What book is it?
It's a. Whoa.
Whoa.
Yeah, no, I knocked over the. Well. Lots of stuff going on.
So Mike, where I was, the most stunning sunsets
Really?
out of you, just incredible.
Nice.
Yeah,
Did you hear about Rich's dad?
Rich,
Say that?
yes, I did.
I guess he's doing better though.
Yeah, I heard.
It's my next.
Oh, you know, we should next door neighbor.
Next door neighbor.
Next door neighbor.
That's cool.
So. We're bringing everybody on. It's good to see you all this morning. What else can we report?
It's a beautiful day in Santa Cruz.
It is a gorgeous day.
It is. What else is going on this week? People. What else is going on this week?
Friday.
Friday night we have services here with Rick and Addie.
Saturday's our anniversary.
Saturday is their anniversary.
27.
Congratulations.
Wonderful. That's awesome.
I can't believe she's stuck with me.
I know, right? It's good that you know that.
I'm not the easiest to get along.
Kidding.
That's okay. I introduced my husband. Have you met my first husband? Keeps him in line.
So we have, can you hear Judith? She's joking.
Well, I'm joking around.
She's
My
joking
poor
about
husband.
Her husband. But yeah, we have Log Bowmer officially on Thursday.
Is it Thursday?
We celebrated Sunday. The park was
So
nice.
really, it's Wednesday night at class.
Yeah. So the 33rd day of the Omer, which is a interesting holiday that no one really can figure out, because there clearly are some pagan underpinnings to the holiday that had to do with people wanting to have a celebration of nature and being outside. And they kind of found a reason to do it. But it's very mysterious, because like even the description in the Talmud isn't real, because they talk about a plague being stopped during that time, and then other places it's clear it's not a plague, it's a massacre the Romans
So land mobilize around.
Yeah, yeah, but like, it wasn't that shrouded in the past when the rabbis wrote about it. It was maybe 200, 300 years after the Roman period, the Roman persecutions, that they wrote about it. So it's not like they didn't know about it, but it seems like there was a lot of either intentional obscuring or kind of like, well, we know what the real story of why we're doing this, but we don't want to talk about it. But look, we know that Purim is Nowruz. I mean, we know that that's the Persian New Year. I mean, it's too obvious. There's other holidays where there probably was some type of, fertility rite or some ancient pagan symbols there that we appropriated and we don't even know what they were. I mean, we can kind of figure it out, or maybe see similarities or read about things that we discovered in archaeological findings later on, many hundreds of years later, but there's things we just don't know. I mean, we'll probably never know. So it's interesting to speculate, but we don't really know. And I guess at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. We've given these holidays completely different meanings, and they're really good meanings, some of them.
But isn't even Shavuot a different meaning today than one?
Well, definitely it's different me, yeah. So Mike is saying Shavuot is completely different because it was originally an completely agricultural holiday. And today we celebrate it as a time of receiving of Mount Sinai. So there's stuff that even the Bible tells us, we're doing it for usually agricultural reasons, and we don't use those agricultural, we don't have those agricultural connections anymore. But there are people who've kind of speculated, especially starting in like kind of the 1920s and 30s, as people started studying, becoming sociologists and historians and applying that archaeology and all these other new sciences to Judaism. They started saying, well, what was the reason that that we did this? What is the cultural reasons that they did this? There's other people that do this, so maybe Jews did it for similar reasons. So we started getting a lot more of those anthropological kind of like studies of Judaism, like we were like other cultures. So you started seeing that, and it's not talked about very much anymore, probably because cultural anthropology. I mean, everybody kind of takes it. We don't argue about it anymore. We just kind of take it as a fact. It's just not. I don't think people are as interested in it anymore for various reasons, or maybe there's no reason to. So we don't talk about it a lot. If it's relevant, then I'll definitely share it. But like I said, I'll tell you, hey, it's speculation. We don't know for sure that that this is the case. So we're gonna get going in a second because I can't wait to read this story. It's been years, and somebody asked me the other day, when was the last time we read the story of Absalom? And it must have been, I don't know,
What we went through before, yeah.
10, 12 years ago. Yeah, so it's been a long time. And I think the last time I probably read this story, my kids were just little kids, and now they're adults. And now I read this story with a whole new perspective, which is that you can't let your kids get out of line or rebel against them. But no, it's actually even more tragic in a way, because we see what Absalom does in this story, and it really is kind of what happens when your kids become independent and decide you're too old, you're not competent anymore. There's something really sad about this in a way, because even if we haven't experienced this directly, most of us know that at some point somebody's going to probably have to say to us, you don't drive anymore. You don't have control of your bank account anymore. And yeah, when you're a kid, you don't think about that. But as you get older and as you deal with that yourself, with your own parents, and then you get closer to having that time be a reality, you do think about it. So yeah, this story is different than I read it 12 years ago.
It's been that long?
It could have been more, could have been more.
Well,
Could
so
have-
we
could have been
started,
2000, it could have been 2000, I don't know, I'm not sure.
Before 7, before we moved.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was the Wednesday night reading of it.
Right.
The Tuesday morning reading of it would have been about 2007.
Hello,
Mm,
you're so good. Oh, I know. You're protecting me,
Been a
huh?
long time.
What a great dog. Thank you, princess. Oh, of course, of course.
Who's that?
it's Jeff, his dog.
Oh, all right.
Oh,
Who's got a great dog named Princess?
I do. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
It's all right, it was just like,
It was.
Jeff was there.
Yeah, Jeff was there. You were there. So
We have a cat named Princess.
I'm gonna keep an eye for people if other people are joining in, but last week we finished in chapter 14, the story of how Absalom got on the outs in the first place, which was he killed his brother, which is a pretty big thing to get on the outs because his older brother Amnon, if you recall, raped his sister Tamar. He waited a few years before he exacted revenge, but he did in fact exact revenge. He killed his brother, or had his brother killed in front of him in cold blood, and really kind of, a couple of years after that happened. And then David, rather than punishing Absalom with killing him, which he could have done, he exiled him, or Absalom went to live with his grandfather, and his Canaanite grandfather, and Absalom comes home, but his dad won't see him. And when his dad won't see him, that makes him even more upset because he says, why did I bother coming home if you're not going to see me? And so he works out a deal with his cousin, or his dad's first cousin, his cousin once removed, Yoav. Yoav basically negotiates Absalom's return. And the last thing we read was that he came to the king and flung himself down to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. So and again, the name Avshalom is interesting because it literally means my father's peace, my father's wholeness. And as we're about to see, Absalom does the exact opposite to his father.
does that name show up?
Absalom?
Yeah.
We
Are
haven't,
people, no,
we-
but are people using it these days?
we haven't met any Absaloms to this point. Do we see Absaloms in Israel today? Yeah, occasionally. It's weird because when you see it, because you know how problematic the character is, but yeah, we
It's
do.
such a nice name.
Yeah, we do. It's not a super popular Hebrew name now. Yoav, for example, very popular Hebrew name. Yoav is kind of a tough dude and definitely does some very questionable things, as we already seen. He kills Abner in cold blood, really in cold blood. When they have a peace negotiation, he stabs him at a parlay, at a peace negotiation.
What would be the English name then?
So Yoav is really the Lord is my father, the Yud He Vav He, God is my father, the Lord is my father. But it was not a real popular name throughout most of Jewish history until the modern nation of Israel. Since Israel has been reestablished, those names that were much more connected to the military leaders of Israel were popular. So when David's always been a popular name. Shlomo has always been a popular name. Even Saul was not an uncommon name in Jewish history. But when Israel was reestablished, these other names that we have that we'll see today, for example, we'll start to see those names pop up more in modern Israel because of the military, because there's military leaders. Avner, not a super popular name, but was hardly ever seen in Hebrew and has come back as a Avner is, you'll see people in their 30s and 40s walking around Israel with the name Avner. And you never saw people like if you look at headstones or Jewish records, you and I didn't have great grandfathers named Abner, but now you'll see it. So Absalom, not so much to answer that question, but it's partly because he really is not. Abner is a great military mind. You can see that there's parts of him that are really quite wonderful. Absalom, not really sure, other than he defends his sister. He's not really, as we're going to see, there doesn't seem to be a lot. He's a handsome guy, that's for sure, but he seems a little vain. And so there's not a whole lot to commend him as a person we should be naming people after. So Absalom comes home. He humbles himself before his father. At this point right here, all we've seen is he's kind of disgruntled. He's disgruntled. And I don't know if he's gruntled now. No, he's still gruntled. Because remember, disgruntled and gruntled are the same thing. He's still gruntled. He's not happy, as we're about to see, even though his father has taken him, has allowed him to come back in his presence. So let's see what Absalom does when he's back home. Rosemary.
Sometime afterward, Absalom provided himself with a chariot, horses, and 50 outrunners. Absalom used to rise early and stand by the road to the city gates. And whenever a man had a case that was to come before the king for judgment, Absalom would call out to him, "What town are you from?" And when he answered, "Your servant is from such and such a tribe in Israel," Absalom would say to him, "It is clear that your claim is right and just, but there is no one assigned to you by the king to hear it."
Okay, so before we get any further, so Absalom would, this is what he did when he came back. He stirred up trouble in a very, very clear way. What he would do is he would wait out in the public area at the main intersection as people were coming into town. And when they would come into town on political business, on getting their problems solved by the king, the person would come in and he'd say, what's your name? Where are you from? Guy would tell him and tell him a little bit about the story, right? And by the way, it doesn't say that he would do that, but the implication is that it didn't matter what the guy said. Whatever the guy said, he would say, "God, that sounds like a really, really, really good case. You've got a real good claim there, sir. We would love to hear your claim. Unfortunately, my father hasn't put anyone in charge of hearing your claim," which of course makes his dad look like not a competent king. So what he's doing is he's undermining his father. He's clearly undermining his dad. He is interested in one thing right now, which is to sow the seeds of doubt and to undermine his father's authority. And he's doing it by getting people who come with a claim, with a grievance, which of course, the people with grievances are the most likely then to go back and go, "Hey, King David is an idiot, but Absalom, now that's the guy. If we only had a guy like Absalom in charge, I could have had my claim heard." So he's really undermining his father. Like he's getting there before anyone can even, we don't know that he's right. We don't know that what he's saying is even has any semblance of truth anyways. He is getting there before anyone from the king's group could ever speak to the guy and basically saying, "You gotta go back. We can't help you." So this is really, really, really not a nice thing to do to his dad. So everybody gets it. He's basically screwing up his dad's job before they can even do anything. So he's getting up early. He's getting there by the area and saying, "Gotta go back. Can't do anything for you. My dad can't get his act together." This is literally like the equivalent would be a guy who works for his dad calling all of his dad's clients and going, "We'd love to get you that shipment, but my dad can't figure out how to get the shipments out right now. So I don't know what to tell you. If I was in charge, maybe, but if I could get my dad out of the company, I could get you your shipment, but he can't figure it out. Anyways, that's what he's doing.
And Absalom went on, if only I were appointed judge in the land and everyone with a legal dispute came before me, I would see that he got his rights. And if a man approached to bow to him, Absalom would extend his hand and take hold of him and kiss him. Absalom did this to every Israelite who came to the king for judgment. Thus, Absalom won away the hearts of the men of Israel.
Yeah, so it's pretty clear that he's effective at it. He's effective at what he's doing right now, which is, again, getting people to love him. And he's getting to the people. He's a man of the people. He's loving the people. He's kissing them. You know, he's getting there, kissing babies. He's not just kissing babies, kissing everybody. He's kissing them and saying, gosh, if only I were in charge, we'd fix this. I mean, it's pretty clear what the writer of this is saying Absalom was doing. It's not even implied. It's flat out what he's doing. So.
After a period of 40 years had gone by, Absalom said to the king, let me go to Hebron and fulfill a vow that I made to the Lord. For your servant made a vow when I lived in Geshur of Aram. If the Lord ever brings me back to Jerusalem, I will worship the Lord.
Yeah, so there's a couple things here. First of all, it's not 40 years, right? So the Septuagint, and there's a Syriac text, right, in Aramaic, which has 4 years, which is
Makes more sense.
a lot more sense. But, you know, it couldn't even be after 40 years of King David being king. It can't be 40 years after David. It can't be 40. It can't be 40. It's a mistake. The word arba became arba'im. What's weird is that, you know, it's so clearly not 40 years, but this text is, as we said, has some problems in it. And so Absalom tells his dad, I need to go to Hebron to worship God, which is weird because what this is basically telling us is that there was something going on in Hebron that was, even though the ark got moved to Jerusalem, that Hebron is still like a cult site, is a place where people are worshiping. Now, why Hebron? Well, because that's where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were buried. Sarah, you know, Rebecca and Leah, maybe some of the sons of Jacob, right? Maybe Judah's buried there. Maybe their ancestor Judah's buried. Hebron is in the Judean, it's in the tribe of Judah. So this is, if anything, maybe the cultic center for the Judahites, right? Maybe Judah people pray there. Hebron is not far from Jerusalem. It's only about 15 miles, but it is far enough away that he has to essentially get permission to go there. And it seems as though, even though it's very plausible that he tells his dad, look, when I was living up with my grandfather, it's what he says, I was up in Geshur, up in that area in the Golan Heights, living with him. I was like, as soon as I get home, I gotta go to Hebron. I gotta worship God there. I made a promise. So of course, this is a little creepy because we already know he's up to some funny business. But the crazy thing, of course, here is that he invokes God's name as he is in worship, and he basically, I have a religious reason to go to Hebron. Of course, he's going to the Judean heartland. He's going to the place where the tribe of Judah is.
Well, we still having issues with the south at this time, north-south.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. You're going to see this real the north-south differences will be very apparent here.
Oh, really?
And Absalom exploits those.
That lasted for many years.
Yeah. It never did last. It was never gone. That's the problem. It never went.
Right.
It never went away. Yep.
The king said to him, go in peace. And so he set out for Hebron. But Absalom sent agents to all the tribes of Israel to say, When you hear the blast of the horn, announce that Absalom has become king in Hebron.
So what his real reason to go? Well, let's read a little bit.
200 men of Jerusalem accompanied Absalom. They were invited and went in good faith, suspecting nothing. Absalom also sent to fetch Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his town, Gilo, when the sacrifices were to be offered. The conspiracy gained strength, and the people supported Absalom in increasing numbers.
Yeah, so he went to Hebron to establish a rival monarchy. He's literally declared himself king. He went to Hebron to do it. So he went further south than Jerusalem, but he does get people from the north as well. It says he got all the tribes of Israel. So as we know, he's been telling people for the last couple of years, hey, look, if I was king, I would help you. So he's got people all around Israel who are saying, oh man, if Absalom's king, then my claim, let's say I have a property dispute. Well, if my property dispute will finally get heard and I'll get my money, I'll get paid if Absalom becomes king. So they have a monetary reason to do this. They also, if we can imagine, the tribes of Israel who don't like King David in the first place are only too happy to see a revolt, to see David's power being split. They love the fact that now David is getting his comeuppance. So you can imagine that David is very, very worried about what's happening now because it's his own son that's doing this. And so it's like, it's not just that there's a revolt, but it's happening within his own house. And it seems as though Absalom really already has a lot of support. And one of the first things he does is he gets this guy Ahithophel, who's one of David's counselors. And he's from a town called Gilo, which is outside of Jerusalem. It's part of Jerusalem today, Gilo. But this guy Ahithophel is very critical for today's story because he's the guy that you want to have next to you because this guy is the counselor, as we're going to see. He's the wisest guy. And for Absalom, getting Ahithophel was really the coup. The coup was getting him because
He's not Hebrew though, right?
what?
He's not Hebrew.
Yeah, he's from Gilo's the city, but he's not from his town. But it's a weird story we're about to read for so many reasons. Because this Ahithophel, which is interesting, because we're going to see a few things here that we don't really see anywhere else in the Bible. But yes, he does seem to be a Hebrew. He does seem to be an
He's
Israelite.
just from Gilon.
Yeah, Gilo. So we're going to see what happens here with this guy, Ahithophel. So, the conspiracy gained strength and power, right? And people supported Absalom in increasing numbers. That's what it says.
Someone came and told David, the loyalty of the men of Israel has veered toward Absalom. Whereupon David said to all the courtiers who were with him in Jerusalem, let us flee at once, or none of us will escape from Absalom. We must get away quickly, or he will soon overtake us and bring down disaster upon us and put the city to the sword.
Yeah. So David says, we got to get out of town. David says it. We have to get out because otherwise we are dead.
But he's in Jerusalem.
Yeah. Yes. So this question of fighting him is definitely on his mind. But his bigger issue is, I don't feel safe in the city right now.
He doesn't know who in the city is with him and who isn't.
And so what David does here is his first, it's his first brilliant response to the coup. This is a coup. I mean, this is flat out a coup. Right now, at this moment, the coup became real because David has decided to get out of town. But what he's going to do is he's going to see who's really with him. Because, as we just said, if he stays in town, he doesn't know who's his friend and who's on Absalom's side. But if he leaves, the feeling is that he's going to leave behind the people who are not on his side. Now you could say, well, maybe there'd be some spies who go along. Yes. However, what he's doing right now is he's putting himself, anyone else who goes with him, in danger. Once he leaves the city of Jerusalem, he's not protected by the city walls.
Right.
There's no protection for anyone who walks out of that. Now, you could say, well, somebody's really clever, a really clever spy. Yeah, that's true, and we're going to see that. However, he's made it really hard for any spy to work against him because every spy who walks out is putting their life in jeopardy. They literally just walked out of the safest and most secure part of Israel. They just put their lives in risk. So again, they can say, well, I'm really not on David's side. But when the battle comes and when people attack David's group, small group now that just walked out, they're not going to have a chance. They're not going to have time to say, hey, wait, I'm not on that side. And so they're literally, he's forcing people. David just brilliantly forced the people to walk out of there who were only really on his side, who have almost, you could argue, nothing to lose because they are on David's side and they're going to get killed no matter what.
That's a weird type of strategy. But
It's a very weird strategy, and it actually shows a level of courage and a level of intellect, which a lot of people wouldn't have, because they'd say, no, I'm not going to leave the comfort of these walls, because the only way I'm going to be protected is to have a good
well,
defense.
exactly, that's what, that's why.
That's why you go to Jerusalem to begin with.
Listen, this is what happens when.
But that's just, it happens, it happened in England with kings and
Oh, yeah.
all that. You stay in your palace until you get killed.
Yep. And his decision here, which is really bold, really courageous, and really smart, is basically saying, I'm going to now prove who my friends are by the moment I walk out of here. And that's what happens, because only people who are going to be on his side, who are going to live and die for him, are going to walk out right now. Keep that in mind. So very risky. It's very, very great. It's basically saying,
Because he doesn't know how many people are coming.
correct. And he also knows it's not a lot of people. There'd be people who might be on his side as long as he's in Jerusalem. But once he walks out of there, anybody who's kind of on the fence, they're staying. They're not going. If they think that Absalom is going to be okay to them, hey, look, it's not no skin off my back. I'll stay here. Whoever's king, I'm okay. The only people who just walked out were people who would die to be with David. And who probably knew that if they get captured with Absalom being in power, they're dead. So this is what just happened. David just winnowed out anybody who is going to be a problem or is not going to be completely reliable. But he also, of course, made himself very vulnerable. But anyways, it's a brilliant decision, very gutsy, but also you can make the argument, I'm going to die. If I'm going to die.
I know what happened, so.
I know, but no, but it's an interesting issue because there is something to learn from this, which is that when you get into a situation where you're going for broke anyways, that you're already you make a decision. Sometimes it seems risky or foolhardy, like how could you leave the palace? But sometimes the best decision in that situation is the one where you're basically saying, hey, I gotta make this decision anyway. And so I'm gonna lose. If I stay here, I'm gonna lose. At least this way I have a chance.
He can only do this because everybody knows he's not a coward.
Right.
If they thought, I was just thinking about the Zelensky now and about the king of England in World War II and the the Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, who said, the king won't go unless I go, or the children won't go unless I go, and I won't go unless the king goes, and he's staying here. If they'd gone, it would have seemed like they were running away. But everybody knows, because of David's whole reputation, that whatever he's doing, he's not running away.
And they also know that David spent many years on the run from King Saul. David knows how to live.
He's a guerrilla fighter with the.
Yeah.
He knows how to live outside of a wall.
Mhm.
This guy can live in a cave, he can live in a tunnel, and he can do it. So yes, there is a sense that this guy knows that this is not the end of the line walking out of that place, because I'm a resilient and very resourceful guy. I can do this. But it's also a guy who's spent the last 15 years or so in the palace, getting comfortable, getting old.
Mhm.
And this is not the same King David necessarily that walked into the palace or walked into Jerusalem years before, when he finally got rid of King Saul, or the Philistines conveniently got rid of King Saul. So this is a very different guy. But again, Absalom did what David did, which was basically make himself king before the other king is dead. So unfortunately, though, for him, it's his own son. All right, so let's see what happens when he leaves.
The king's courtiers said to the king, "Whatever our lord the king decides, your servants are ready." So the king left, followed by his entire household, except for 10 concubines, whom the king left to mind the palace.
Yeah, they're going to be critical for the story. It's not a little, when you see something on the wall in the movie, and you know that axe is going to come back into play.
Right.
I will say that the 10 concubines didn't just get thrown out there as a MacGuffin, as they say. This is actually going to be critical for our story. Yeah, so again, these are not wives, but these are not, yeah, he had a lot of concubines. Actually, well, he had at least 10, but they stay behind. But everyone else from the household goes, which means, again, the other wives, the other parts of the family that are part of his household.
Did I miss Bathsheba?
Bathsheba would have definitely been one of those people.
I missed that story.
Oh, yeah. Just a couple weeks.
We can go back.
Bathsheba was, no, Judith missed the Bathsheba. She knows the Bathsheba story, but the Bathsheba story is critical too, as we said, because the Bathsheba story, the kicker of that story, remember, was Nathan coming to him and saying, "You're going to have problems in your own household.
Yeah.
Your household is going to turn on you." And as he critically said to him, your own sons are going to, someone's going to, well, I didn't say your sons, someone's going to sleep with your concubines, which essentially, hello, we just had the foreshadowing of what just happened, because the 10 concubines are left behind. Yeah. So here we go.
The king left, followed by all the people, and they stopped at the last house. All his followers marched past him, including all the Karatites and all the Pelatites and all the Gittites. 600 men who had accompanied him from Gath also marched by the king.
Yeah, and it's real important. We talked about these guys before, the Cretim and the Pletim. These are his mercenary armies, we believe. We don't know for sure who the Cretim and the Pletim are, but they seem we're pretty sure that these are like the Praetorian Guards. These are his inner circle. These are his best fighters. So these are people who we see have been with him since Gath, since he was back with the Philistines. What's really important is we think that these Cretim and Pletim are actually Philistine mercenaries. These aren't even Israelites.
It almost seems like he needs to hire, because then he knows who they're for, at least.
Correct. So these people are going to be, they're bought and paid for. They're also probably dead if Absalom takes over, because
You can never trust a
you
mercenary.
can't trust these guys. And they're not Israelite. And Absalom could kill them all. Well, we don't know that for sure, but we assume that they're non-Israelite. Absalom could kill them and say, we don't want these Philistine soldiers here anymore. David's been trusting them for decades, but Absalom doesn't have to trust them. The argument would be, of course, that these are probably really very highly trained professional soldiers. And I want to point this out. 600 professional soldiers are probably equal to a couple thousand guys who come in and when there's an army attacking them, which are the farmers and the people who work as tanners or blacksmith. They could be strong guys, but they're not professional soldiers. These aren't guys that train all the time. These aren't guys who necessarily even have their own swords. These guys do. And they're probably they are the backbone of David's defense. But as he's going out now on his own, he's not really going out on his own. He's got the army, he's got the professional army with him. And as much as Absalom has the people and has counselors and has, as we're about to see, he's going to have Jerusalem, not having professional soldiers, or at least the best professional soldiers of the kingdom, that is a liability that Absalom doesn't have. He has a lot, but he doesn't have these guys. And so the Gittites are clearly Philistine. The Cretim and the Pletim, maybe not, but it seems like that it is some version of, remember, Plishtim are Philistines. There's only a shin missing from this. The other thing is we know that the Philistines were from the Greek islands. We believe that Cretim are people from Crete. Specifically, this type of Philistine person would have been from Crete. So it seems as though that's what these guys are. So these are the guys you want to have fighting by. Now.
And the king said to Ittai the Gittite, why should you too go with us? Go back and stay with the new king, for you are a foreigner and you are also an exile from your country. You came only yesterday. Should I make you wander about with us today, when I myself must go wherever I can? Go back and take your kinsman with you in true faithfulness. Ittai replied to the king, as the Lord lives and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king may be, there your servant will be, whether for death or for life.
So you can see that, at least one of these main guys, Ittai, who was a Philistine. Remember, David killed Philistines. I mean, that was one of the things that David did at one point in his life. He killed a really big Philistine, Goliath, who was from Gath. But now David is so beloved, at least by this Philistine from Gath, the same city, that the guy will say, wherever you go, I'm going to die. I mean, if you die, I'm dying with you. I'm dying by your side. It's a very, very powerful act of friendship and loyalty. And you can see that David says, go back. You're not an Israelite. You don't have, this isn't your fight. And the guy says, no, I'm with you no matter what. And so this is a really, really special feeling that people had for David. We saw that Jonathan had it, that David has an ability to get that type of loyalty and friendship from people that they're willing to die with him. That's what this guy just said. By the way, talk about names. This name, Ittai, very popular Hebrew name today. It's not even, the guy wasn't even an Israelite. This guy was a Philistine. But the name Ittai is a popular name. Guy's a soldier, guy's tough, he's loyal, he's a good friend. It's not a name that we ever heard before in Jewish names 200, 300 years ago, 500 years ago. We hear it today. So in Israel today, you see that, oh, Ittai. Where do I know that name from? Oh yeah, he's a Philistine. It's a totally legitimate Hebrew name today. What does it mean? It means, well, the root of it is it means like with me. It means essentially you're with me, which is the perfect name for a guy who just did this. So, yeah. So it's a real story of, again, people who were loyal to King David.
And David said to Ittai, then march by. And Ittai the Gittite and all his men and all the children who were with him marched by. The whole countryside wept aloud as the troops marched by. The king crossed the Kidron Valley, and all the troops crossed by the road to the wilderness.
Yeah, and so as they're leaving the Kidron Valley, which is one of the valleys that borders Jerusalem, right? So the Kidron Valley is one of those valleys that makes makes Jerusalem very defensible. Because once you go out the Kidron Valley, you're out in the wilderness. You're out on the flatlands, and you are sitting down. And it says the people cried when they saw him leave. When David and his troops walked by, their beloved king, the king has won so many battles for them and brought some sense of stability, at least when it comes to external threats. They just saw him walk out of the capital. And what's going to happen now? They don't know. Like, there's an unknown factor here too. They're losing David. Are they ever going to see him again? Is this king that was supposed to be the Messiah, the savior for the tribes, is this the last we'll ever see him? And what's going to happen with his dynasty? What happens now? That's what we're going to see.
Then Zadok appeared with all the Levites carrying the ark of the covenant of God, and they set down the ark of God until all the people had finished marching out of the city. Abiathar also came up. But the king said to Zadok, "Take the ark of God back to the city. If I find favor with the Lord, he will bring me back and let me see it and its abode. And if he should say, 'I do not want you, I am ready,' let him do with me as he pleases."
Wow. So David just had the ark brought to him. Didn't ask for it, and he actually says, "Take it back. I don't need it. If I'm going to win, I'll come back. Keep the ark safe." Right? He doesn't say that, but that's kind of the implication. Don't take it out on the road with me now. So he had a chance, according to this. Did he say this? Did this really happen? Was this choreographed for everybody to see? Who knows? But the main priest, Zadok, and his other priests, this other Levite, the Kohanim that were with him, including Abiathar, who's been with him since Abiathar's family and all those priests of Nob were killed, were murdered by Saul. He just sent he sent them back. Go back. If I come back and I come back to the temple, if God wants me to win, I'll come back. That's what he says. It's basically a test for God. God, if I'm the one, it's not because you gave me the ark, but because you gave me the power. Because if he wins and he has the ark, everyone says, "Oh, David kidnapped the ark. That's why he won. God, he had God there." No, he's saying God's going to stay there. I don't mind God staying back with Absalom. God is with me wherever I am. And that's what he basically just said. God likes me. If I'm still the one, I'll come back. And he says, if not, this is the one time we have this Hineni. Without God being the one who asks for it. He says, Hineni. And he says it, I'm ready, to himself. But obviously, God is still in the background there, right? Because he's saying essentially, whatever God decides, I'm ready. But God didn't call him. He says, I'm ready. And it's one of those examples of Hineni, but it's even in some ways more powerful because he put himself into that situation of saying it and realizing that this is the Hineni moment. But it's because I understand the implications of what I'm about to do, and I know that the only way I can survive this is if God really wants me to be the king. And essentially, he's making a decision right here, which is that even if I win, I lose. Because the only way I can win and ever say this wasn't about me not wanting my son to be king. What's he doing? I mean, essentially, Absalom was one of the main people who would have been king anyways. He's basically saying, well, I don't want him to be king yet. He's not ready to be king yet. Maybe he's not the right one to be king. All of those things, but it's me or him. He knows that. It's already now come down to me or him. And he basically says, I'm leaving it to God to choose. It's a very courageous and bold thing to do. But he's basically also announcing at this point right here, even if I win, it's not going to be pretty. Because one of my heirs is going to have to die if I win. Here's what he says.
And the king said to the priest, Zadok, do you understand? You return to the safety of the city with your two sons, your own son Ahimaaz, and Abiatar's son Jonathan. Look, I shall linger in the steppes of the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me.
Yeah, so he says, you understand what I'm saying? Go back, be safe, and you and Abiatar. Now you can notice already that he's made Zadok the main priest. Abiatar, for whatever reasons, is not the main priest. Zadok is. And that again is the ancestor of the Sadducees, the Saducees. They're descendants of Zadok. Abiatar is not the priest that you'd think his long-term relationship was with Abiatar, but he's already promoted Zadok to be the guy in charge. On the other hand, he hasn't demoted Abiatar completely. So Abiatar is in the mix, but the one he actually talks to. So it's almost like they have co-priests. I'll have co-priests for a little while still, but can't have co-priests.
Zadok and Abiatar brought the ark of God back to Jerusalem, and they stayed there. David, meanwhile, went up the slope of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered, and he walked barefoot, and all the people who were with him covered their heads and wept as they went up.
Yeah. So he's just outside of Jerusalem. He's at the Mount of Olives. On the other side of the hill, other side of the valley, on the other hill, on the other side of the valley from the wall or from the old city. From when we see the wall. And the Mount of Olives today is a huge cemetery, right? It's a giant cemetery where everybody who's Jewish from around the world who wants to be buried in Jerusalem, that's where they all want to be buried. It's where Oscar Schindler is buried, by the way. It's a very important place in Christian story of Jesus, because Jesus essentially is there the night before he dies. He's executed. And it's probably not a coincidence, my friends, because this is where King David spends his first night outside of the house. And what does he do? He cries. So much like Jesus the night before he dies, and he knows he's going to die. Jesus knows he's going to die, right? He tells his followers, I'm going to die tomorrow. And you're going to allow it, right? It's famous stories. You're going to deny me, guys. You're actually, I'm going to be taken away. You'll betray me, essentially. Not like Judas, but you'll basically say, you don't know me. This is exactly what happens. And one could argue, it's not my issue, but is Christian scholars have talked about it before. There's a reason why it happens in that area, because this is where David essentially feels this sense of loss and sense of, I could die. And of course, Jesus does. So it's almost, again, one of those stories of Jesus fulfilling, the sacrifice that David almost made here. Doesn't have to make, but, as the Messiah is sending to David, he does. So there is this Mount of Olives is very important. It's just it's just the location. By the time we get to the Christian story, it's a very important part of the story of Jesus, and Jesus' last moments. So you can see he's walking around barefoot. His head was, covered. They're crying. Everybody else is crying. They think that this is maybe their last night. they don't know what's going to happen in the morning. Is Absalom going to attack them immediately? So here's what happens.
David was told that Achitophel was among the conspirators with Absalom, and he prayed, "Please, O Lord, frustrate Achitophel's counsel." When David reached the top where people would prostrate themselves to God, Hushai the Archite was there to meet him, with his robe torn and with earth on his head. David said to him, "If you march on with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you go back to this city and say to Absalom, 'I will be your servant, O king. I was your father's servant formerly, and now I will be yours,' then you can nullify Achitophel's counsel for me."
Yeah, so this is really critical because this is part of the Achitophel subplot, which is Achitophel, as we've already seen, has been brought into Absalom's side, Absalom's circle, but he's very, very powerful counselor. Very powerful. We're going to see why he's so powerful. He's like, he has a God-given gift. And the rabbis actually compare him to Balaam, right? Balaam also had a God-given gift. He used it for bad. And as we're going to see, Achitophel was using it for bad. Why? Because David is the right monarch. God has not pulled the kingdom away from David. So Achitophel is now counseling Absalom. He's on the wrong side. But he is what he is, which is a genius. And this is the problem. David knows it. And David basically says, God, you gotta do something to frustrate Achitophel's counsel. Because as long as he has an Achitophel, he can do amazing things, Absalom. He has the best strategic mind with him on his side. So that's why David says, please God, frustrate his plans. Now, he prays, but of course he does something, which is, I got to get my own person in there who's going to frustrate Achitophel, which is Hushai. So Hushai was another one of the counselors. This guy came out to be with King David. He chose sides. He chose David's side. David says, wait a second. Well, he says to him, you're gonna be a burden to me, which is a nice way of saying, I got another plan for you. Because he could have just said, go back and be my spy. But he says, look, be safe, be back there. You don't have to worry about, schlepping your tired old butt with us, right? Go back and you have a much bigger role to play, which is that you can be there to stop Achitophel. And so he asks them to do this. And so this is David's spy. David says, you go back, pretend like you're working with Absalom, and you're gonna be my spy. So this is David, again now, another thing that David does, which shows his brilliance, which is, I need someone inside the palace. I need someone there who can frustrate the designs against me and give me the information that I need to know what's going on. So he says, I'm going to place someone in there. And as we're going to see, this is the critical part of the story, is what David is doing here too. So again, he's on the run. He's giving up one of his counselors to be a spy.
And he's lost his other counselor to his son.
Achitophel is already on that side. And this game right here, this strategy, this chess game, if you will, is the critical part maybe of the whole rebellion. As we're about to see, Achitophel, and this is why the rabbis recognize it, you can't argue against his brilliance. You can't. He's too good. But you might be able to mess him up. But he's not going to be stupid. That isn't going to happen. He's not going to do the wrong thing. But you can get someone to counter him. And that's the point. David prayed, and then he did something about it.
You will have the priests Zadok and Abiathar there, and you can report everything that you hear in the king's palace to the priests Zadok and Abiathar. Also, their 2 sons are there with them, Zadok's son Ahimaaz and Abiatar's son Jonathan. And through them, you can report to me everything you hear.
So he's got his ears. He's got his ears there, but it's more than that.
And so Hushai, the friend of David, reached the city as Absalom was entering Jerusalem.
Yep, so he got back in time. He got back in time to be there when Absalom comes into the city.
It almost seems like Absalom, just thinking, hey, I want.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, let's see what happens, because this is what we're going to read today. We're going to read this chapter. Chapter 16 is where we're going to finish today.
David had passed a little beyond the summit when Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, came toward him with a pair of saddled asses, carrying 200 loaves of bread, 100 cakes of raisin, 100 cakes of figs, and a jar of wine. The king asked Ziba, "What are you doing with these?" Ziba answered, "The asses are for your majesty's family to ride on, the bread and figs are for the attendants to eat, and the wine is to be drunk by any who are exhausted in the wilderness."
Yeah, so Ziba, we met before. Ziba works for Mephibosheth, who is Saul's grandson. Saul's grandson, the one who is lame in both of his legs. Jonathan's son, David's almost brother, if you will, right? The one he loved. Mephibosheth is still in the picture. So if you're wondering, well, how's Saul's family going to deal with this coup? Well, you're about to see, because Ziba is here. Now remember, Ziba got promoted by King David when David brought Mephibosheth to his table. So remember, Mephibosheth is part of the inner circle, if you will. He gets a place at the table. It was David's attempt at making sure that Saul's family didn't feel completely disenfranchised. It was his idea to, keep his potential enemies close. And Ziba is the one who is basically the major domo for Mephibosheth. He's the one who is in charge of his fields and in charge of all his property. And David, as we can see, did something all along, which was he made sure he had someone in Mephibosheth's house that he could trust, because he promoted this guy, Ziba. So Ziba right now proved his worth and David's brilliance in the first place, which is make sure you have somebody watching Mephibosheth, because again, they're only too happy to now see David have his comeuppance. They've been waiting, Saul's family's been waiting for years for David to fall. So here's Ziba. What's happening with Ziba?
"And where is your master's son?" the king asked. "He is staying in Jerusalem," Ziba replied to the king, "for he thinks that the house of Israel will now give him back the throne of his grandfather." The king said to Ziba, "Then all that belongs to Mephibosheth is now yours." And Ziba replied, "I bow low. Your majesty is most gracious to me."
So that was only 2 verses, but it's very clear what just happened. Mephibosheth chose the wrong side. Now, Mephibosheth wasn't like a big fan of Absalom. He's not like going, "Hey, I like Absalom much better than David." No, he's like, no. If David and Absalom are fighting, the tribe of Judah has a inner family feud right now. It's awesome, because now Israel, the northern tribes, are going to go back to me. King Saul is back in business. His dynasty is back in business. Israel is going to make me king. He doesn't say Judah. He's not saying I'm going to get everything, but at least I'll get the northern tribes. Now, this was what Mike was saying before. What is going on with Israel? What's going on with these people? It's very clear that at least for some of them, including the people in Saul's inner circle, his family or surviving family, they are just waiting around. They are not ever thinking that this united kingdom of Israel and Judah is going to survive, because David's only been in power for 20 years. They're already trying to while he's still alive, he's still alive, David. He's on the run, but he's still alive. They're trying to get the kingdom back. They're trying to split the kingdom. So how long did the kingdom of Israel and Judah, how long were they united? Well, technically they're united for about 50 years during King David and King Solomon's lifetimes. Not even all of King Solomon's, but it's pretty clear that neither David nor Solomon ever sat over a unified throne that everybody thought was going to last. Remember, David is first king over Judah and then becomes king over Israel too when Saul dies. And once Ishbosheth is out of the picture, right? Because Ishbosheth and David are king at the same time. Solomon, by the time he dies, Jeroboam declares himself king of Israel. So the point is that neither one of them, neither David or Solomon, ever lived and died there and had their whole reign be free of this civil war, if you will, or not, even if it's not a civil war, a unified kingdom. There never really was a unified kingdom. It was held together very, very tenuously during that overlap time of King David's strength and King Solomon's strength. But it takes a lot of work, and it's more illusion than it is fact. The connections are not really strong. It's kind of sad because the reality is that there is not a unified kingdom. And I wouldn't say we obscure that, but we don't talk about it a lot. And again, the rabbis didn't care so much about that because for them, Jewish power was almost all, even again by the time of Rabbi Akiva and the later rabbis, it was a fantasy. The Romans were in charge, the Persians were in charge. Who cares? There are no Jewish kings. But even for the people who lived, the early rabbis like Rabbi Hillel, the concept of Jewish power over a large kingdom was already ancient history. So I do want to point out that this is, like when we talk about it from the standpoint of almost an imaginary, it's almost imaginary. It really, really didn't exist. So,
But there were still problems with North and South when Judah Maccabee was around, right?
well, interestingly, by the time of Judah Maccabee, there are northern and southern differences of power and strength and those kind of like who's really in charge. But it's more regional than it is tribal.
Oh, really?
Because by
Right,
that
right,
point,
right,
there's
right.
no tribe, right? There's
Right.
no Naphtali, there's no Menashe or Ephraim.
Right.
So because the tribal issue isn't there, there isn't the same, but there always were northern and southern regional issues.
Well, that was what we revolt many years later, right after the Second Temple.
Yes, but the second revolt was the Bar Kokhba revolt was more of a unified Jewish response.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, and there wasn't a north and south difference, though there are always, again, there are always regional concerns. And Northerners probably always felt like, I don't care what happens in Jerusalem. I care about what happens in the Galilee. And so there was always that, there was always those issues. I mean, even again, during the time of Jesus, we can see that the people in the Galilee either didn't care or really didn't like the people in Jerusalem that much. They just didn't, but it wasn't tribal. It was more, by that period, it was just more regional. It was like, hey, my problem. It's like, if you're from San Francisco or LA, and you go, I don't care what happens up there. I don't like the Giants anyway, whatever. It's like, whatever the reason was, we were like, that's Northern California. That's not Southern California. So yeah, there was always regional issues where like, don't take our water, don't take our people, don't take our taxes. So there was always that issue. And I think, again, by the time of the rabbis, it's not tribal anymore. But here it is. And it really is a question of which dynasty. So Ziba has got now all of Mephibosheth's stuff. David just said he's done. He's done.
As King David was approaching Bahurim, a member of Saul's clan, a man named Shimei, son of Gera, came out from there hurling insults as he came. He threw stones at David and all King David's courtiers, while all the troops and all the warriors were at his right and his left.
Yeah, so if you want to know, okay, that's Mephibosheth. What about other Benjaminites, other people of Saul's group? No, they don't like him. They took the opportunity. This one guy, Shimei, he was only too happy to come out and throw stuff at King David as he was going by. Yeah.
And these are the insults that Shimei hurled. Get out, you criminal, you villain. The Lord is paying you back for all your crimes against the family of Saul, whose throne you seized. The Lord is handing over the throne to your son Absalom. You are in trouble because you are a criminal.
Yeah, what's the translation of the King James for that?
For criminal?
Bloody man.
I don't really like the criminal translation, which is why I asked Mary to read that. A bloody man. The word is ishdami,
That's blood.
which is blood. You're a man with blood on his hands. Criminal is a little bit of a softer take on that, I would say, because the Benjaminites and Saul's family and Saul's crew say, you are a man with blood on his hands, which is a far more direct feeling that he killed them. He killed Saul's family. There was a purge. There seems to be at least the feeling by these people, Saul's people, that David killed them, Saul's family. So I got news for you. As much as the Bible wants to tell us that David didn't have blood on his hands, and this translation would like us to not realize that the people, when he came out, said, hey, bloody David, which is what they just called him, bloody David, bloody man, they felt he did. So again, this is where we get this idea that maybe David was a little bit more, as much as David says, I wasn't anywhere near Saul when he got killed. I wasn't anywhere near any of these other people when they get killed. Maybe he is, because they feel he is. And this guy just said, so is he making it up? Probably not. It
Does
doesn't.
not have been there physically, but he was there.
Yeah, and does it matter that David doesn't want to think he had the blood of Saul in his hands? Remember, he killed the guy who came and said, I killed Saul when he was mortally wounded. He killed the guy. He seems like he doesn't want to be anywhere near killing a king. It seems like at least the people who are on Saul's side feel that he did. So maybe this betrays a little bit of what they really feel about it and what might really have happened, which is that David might be a little bit more complicit in the removal of Saul's people than the Bible says that he was.
Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said to the king, why let that dead dog abuse my lord the king? Let me go over and cut off his head. But the king said, what has this to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? He is abusing me only because the Lord told him to abuse David. And who is to say, why did you do that?
So here's a very interesting response that David has, which is that as he's being abused by this guy, Shimei, he, again, Abishai, who's part of the crew, the Yoav family, David's cousins, David's counselors, David's inner circle, he says, let me go over and kill that guy. Don't let this guy abuse you. And David says, no. David says, God said that this was going to happen. And so David seems a little bit, and this is one of the issues that we see in the story. David is resigned to this punishment. David seems to understand that, yeah, God said I was going to have to deal with this. And he seems okay with it. And he's not happy about it. He's not saying, yeah, well, but he says, I got to deal with this. And he's only doing what God said. which must have really, as you can see, frustrated the people who were part of his inner circle. He said, I don't care. It makes all of us look bad, David. You can't let this guy get away with it. And David says, no, I'm going to suffer this situation, and this is God's plan. And again, he doesn't say, I'm happy with it. He doesn't say I'm happy about it, but he says, this is it. This is what I got to deal with now. I'm dealing with the consequences. I was told this was going to happen. So there is a sense here that he's kind of resigned. And again, we saw when his son died, when that product of his relationship with Bathsheba dies, he prays, he tries to stop it from happening. But he also says, look, I tried to get God to spare the child, but there's nothing I can do now. And so he does seem to have that feeling, which David seems to have, which not everybody has that. Not all of us have that ability to say, and again, he's told by God. It's not like he has to guess. He was told by God this was going to happen. So it's a little different. He doesn't have to, like, in the back of his mind go, am I really being punished here? No, he's really being punished here. He was told he was going to be punished. Most of us don't have that. We have to kind of doubt whether, am I really being punished here for a reason? Yeah, he's being punished for a reason. He was told he was going to be punished for a reason. So it's a little different, but he does seem resigned to his fate, if you will.
David said further to Abishai and all the courtiers, if my son, my own issue, seeks to kill me, how much more the Benjaminite? Let him go on hurling abuse, for the Lord has told him to. Perhaps the Lord will look upon my punishment and recompense me for the abuse Shimei has uttered today.
Yeah, and so his other reaction here is, of course the Benjaminites don't like me. My own son doesn't like me. What do you expect from this guy? And so David has a very, very wise attitude about this, which is, so even if it's not God, if it's just the way things are, this guy doesn't like me. It shouldn't surprise me. But then he says something weird at the end, which is even more, again, gets back to this theological issue, this punishment, if you will. Maybe if I suffer this punishment, that's what God wants, and I'll get off the hook. Maybe this tips the scales in my favor. Maybe that's what, if this is what God wants, then maybe once it happens, then I can move on. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is the recompense. Maybe this is the thing that's going to put it into
Tip the scales, as it were.
this punishment. So we have that approach sometimes when it comes to suffering, which is that sometimes we have to suffer to balance the scales. Call it righteous suffering. I'm not saying I agree with the concept. I'm just saying that it exists, and it exists in the Bible a little bit, not a lot, but it definitely exists for King David. And again, King David knows that this is supposed to happen. This is part of a divine plan. Later on, the rabbis traditionally, and especially again, by the time we get to rabbinic Judaism, to the Talmud, we get these kind of ideas. My friends, this is what essentially, when we talk about the scales, when we talk about it at Rosh Hashanah, we talk about tipping the scales, good actions, tipping the scales in our favor, suffering, tipping the scales so that we don't have to suffer anymore. There's these balances that we sometimes see that have been traditionally seen as maybe this is the thing that tips the scale one way or the other, from suffering to not suffering, from goodness to bad, bad to good. So that's what he says there. And it's essentially, that's his answer. So maybe this is it. I get this now, but I'll get something else later.
David and his men continued on their way, while Shimei walked alongside on the slope of the hill, insulting him as he walked and throwing stones at him and flinging dirt. The king and all who accompanied him arrived exhausted, and he rested there. Meanwhile, Absalom and all the people, the men of Israel, arrived in Jerusalem together with Ahithophel.
Okay, so let's pause right there. By the way, when he was walking along, he was flinging dirt and stones, and it was also possible that he was slinging feces at him too. Very possible. There's a problem there. Again, our text is not great. There's a word. There's a word to see. Where were they going?
Exactly. They arrived there.
They arrived. Where did they arrive? Hello. Yeah, it's these little things that again remind us that the copy of the book of Samuel we have is not great. But the Septuagint does have the word at the Jordan, which means they walked out of Jerusalem and they headed towards the Jordan, which means they walked east, which makes a lot of sense, which means they probably walked down the way of Jericho and got out of Jerusalem the way we get out of Jerusalem when we go down to Messiah, which is that they go out of Jerusalem, go down the mountain, go down the mountains, they go get off the hill, and they walk towards the Jordan River, which if you're looking for a natural boundary, it's a good one. And Absalom, as we see, the people of Israel arrive in Jerusalem.
Make a movie of this.
Well, there have been movie versions of King David, but not really this part. There have not been really
Right.
good. It's a really good story. And it's problematic because you have to give the backstory of King David and why he got into this problem with Bathsheba. And I think it makes David look amazing and heroic, but very human. That's the problem. And for people who have an issue with King David in all of his not glory, this is definitely a problem, because it also puts us into the frame of mind of look how close David was to losing it all. And people don't like that, because as much as we're told that this is going to happen, as long as, and again, I think it's partly Jews who don't want to accept David for all his shortcomings. There's also a problem for Christians who, because Jesus is a descendant of King David, have a real problem with the precursor of the Messiah, another Messiah, but again, King David looking so bad, because it really makes the biblical characters, it makes them look very human. And you really have to come to terms with David's. What?
Well, but yes, people always have trouble with their heroes being flawed.
Yeah, and David's really flawed.
Yeah.
He's also really an amazing guy. He's a brilliant and scary guy. Because if you were friends with him and you were lucky enough to be on the right side of David, things were great. But if you got on the bad side of David, things were not great. You could die. And this happens throughout David's life. The problem is that David, everybody knows that about King David. And then the problem is, what does he do with his own son, which we're going to see. So it's a very problematic situation with David, because he was such an amazing person. And we see the totality of his life. Unlike most people in the Bible, we only get to glimpse part of their lives or whole snippets of their lives. We see David's life develop, and we see a lot of it.
We see his sins and we see his good things.
Yeah, and David seemed to be okay with that, because he let the story be told. This didn't have to be in the Bible. Solomon, whoever allowed this stuff to be kept, it didn't have to be kept. David didn't have to report the story. Anyways, and he had to have reported the story. Somebody in his inner circle reported the story. Had to. This is not made up. I don't know for sure, but it does not seem like made up stuff.
You were there.
Even to the details of Shimei throwing dirt on him. It just doesn't seem like it was made up. All right.
When Hushai the Archite, David's friend, came before Absalom, Hushai said to Absalom, "Long live the king! Long live the king!" But Absalom said to Hushai, "Is this your loyalty to your friend? Why didn't you go with your friend?" "Not at all," Hushai replied. "I am for the one whom the Lord of this people and all the men of Israel have chosen, and I will stay with him. Furthermore, whom should I serve if not David's son? As I was in your father's service, so I will be in yours."
So Hushai just ingratiated himself to Absalom, because Absalom is suspicious of him. Like, you're one of my father's people. And he says, no, I'm not your father's person. I am with the Lord's person. And not only that, the people's person. You are chosen by the Lord and by everyone. So I'm staying with you. And I love David, but you're his son. So, yeah, his son. It's not a big deal. Anyways, so I am your guy. I am your guy, just like I was your dad's guy. Now I'm your guy.
Absalom then said to Achitophel, "What do you advise us to do?" And Achitophel said to Absalom, "Have intercourse with your father's concubines, whom he left to mind the palace. And when all Israel hears that you have dared the wrath of your father, all who support you will be encouraged."
Oh, there's the concubines. You knew they were coming back. Yeah, and of course, this is what Nathan said was going to happen in the first place, which is that your son is going to sleep with your wives in front of everybody. Well, let's read what happens.
So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and Absalom lay with his father's concubines with the full knowledge of all Israel.
Yep. So as much as this was an act, a sexual act, it was also a political act, right? This is an act where, again, he could have had sex with them in his bedroom, does it on the roof, which of course is exactly where David first saw Bathsheba, on the roof, in public, out of the daylight. And so the irony of this, coming back home. And again, Nathan said, this is what God's going to do to you. Your son is going to sleep with your wives, your women. Now, of course, he does it, as Achitophel said.
All 10 at one time.
I don't know, it doesn't say all at the same time, but again, within the same period. Yeah, within the same period, he went. And he did it in such a way, again, that he sends a message, which is, I'm not afraid of my dad. My dad has no power over me. I just slept with his wives, with his women. They're now mine. Which again is there's no greater way of asserting your dominance and your place in the house by saying, what was his is now mine, and not anything. The women are mine. So my dad's not coming home. He's not coming back. He's dead. He's gone. There's no way he's coming back. I just took the women. Now, again, when we talk about the foreshadowing that we have in Genesis, this is what Reuben does with Bilhah. Can't be a coincidence. Can't be a coincidence, because the only time we see these stories are in Genesis or in the book of Samuel. So as much as we talked about, again, the stories of Dinah coming back, the stories of Tamar coming back, stories of Joseph, Coat coming back, this one's there too. It's a throwaway line, maybe one line in Genesis, but it's pretty important. It's in Genesis chapter 35. So that whole section, like Genesis 34, which is where the story of Dinah is, to Genesis 38, the story of Tamar. Every chapter, 34, 35, not 36, because that's the list of Edomite kings, but 37 and 38, they're all here. Every chapter you'll find a little piece. Even I would argue the story of Samuel in the book of Samuel, where we read about the interesting trickery that Rachel did with her father when she claims she doesn't have the idols. And then later on, when Michal puts puts a teraphim in the bed to symbolize or to take the place of make her think that David's in the bed, we read about teraphim. We read about
Basically fan fiction.
I don't know. It's fan fiction, or it's definitely, Judith said it's fan fiction. It is definitely people playing around with stories from Genesis. So, yeah. This is a story of women essentially also being part of the moving the narrative, but women never learn their names. You don't know these women, never learn their names. But these women,
Does Midrash give them any other?
no, I've never seen a list of the names of the concubines. Doesn't mean that doesn't exist anywhere. I don't think it exists. But what's interesting about these women is that they are part of the narrative. They're part of the story, because if this doesn't happen, Absalom doesn't have the full recognition of what he's really done, which is gotten rid of his father. His father's done. And this is also an example of Achitophel's advice. This is all an example of what Achitophel does, which is pretty powerful. And here's
In
what
those days, the advice which Achitophel gave was accepted like an oracle sought from God. That is how all the advice of Achitophel was esteemed, both by David and by Absalom.
So all Achitophel has to do is say it, and people believe it. He is the wizard. Well, he's the Oracle of Omaha. He's the Warren Buffett of Jerusalem. Yeah, he's like it says. He's like an oracle from God. Ask him, and it's almost like you're getting God's advice. You're getting God's words. So David and Absalom listened to Achitophel. We're going to finish with this Achitophel story now, which is very important to read. That again, his advice was like God's words. Which again, you see why the rabbis say he's like Balaam. And he's like Balaam also in the fact that, yeah, he does what he says happens. That doesn't mean he's a good guy. That doesn't mean that he was using his powers for good. Because the implication, of course, here is that what Absalom did was wrong. He never should have supported Absalom. If he was really a smart guy, if he was really speaking on behalf of God, he wouldn't have gone against God's chosen king. So Achitophel might know everything, but he's not using his powers for good. So that's why he gets compared to Balaam, which of course also means that the rabbis essentially recognize that there are people who have powers, like, every good superhero has to have a good villain, but those villains are not just from other countries. You have them amongst our own people.
He wasn't too bright either.
Well, he was bright, but he
He
wasn't,
Well, he wasn't,
Absalom?
no, Achitophel.
Oh, Achitophel.
I mean, he might have been smart, but he wasn't street smart, because, he had to have known what was gonna happen.
So yes, so the issue is, what does he know? So here's the interesting thing. What he knows, he's smarter than, let's say, everybody else in the world.
Sure.
But the problem is just because you know everything, and again, as you said, it's street smarts. The problem that he has, as you're going to see, is that he's never wrong. But again, for those who love Greek mythology, he's the Cassandra. You'll see why he's the Cassandra in the story. It's not always a Cassandra, because we just read that he gave Absalom advice and he did it. And it was powerful and it worked. But we're about to see what happens. I won't ruin it. Let's read the story, because we're going to read it right now.
And Achitophel said to Absalom, "Let me pick 12,000 men and set out tonight in pursuit of David. I will come upon him when he is weary and disheartened, and I will throw him into a panic. And when all the troops with him flee, I will kill the king alone. And I will bring back all the people to you. When all have come back, except the man you are after, all the people will be at peace."
So Achitophel says, let me take an army with me right now, and I'll get rid of David. I don't have to kill hardly anybody else. Because if I attack right now, everyone's going to flee. There's no army except for his little group of main fighters.
I'll be able to just kill him. We won't have a civil war. If I kill him right now, he just left, he hasn't been able to rally other people behind him. If I get him right now, he's done. And I'll just kill him. You won't have to kill a lot of people. It'll all be good. Now, when he just said that, he was 100% right. He's 100% right. His plan just now, David's done. This is the problem. He's not wrong. He's not wrong.
The advice pleased Absalom and all the elders of Israel. Absalom said, summon Hushai the Archite as well, so we can hear what he too has to say. Sorry. Someone seems to be at the door here. Can you excuse me for a moment?
All right, Rosemary, no, go out. We are at a very climactic moment here where Absalom is.
Okay, just a package, we're good. Sorry.
So Absalom wants to hear what Hushai's got to say.
So sorry
You
about
already know, and to remind you, Hushai is David's spy in the castle. So you can imagine what Hushai gets to do.
Hushai came to Absalom, and Absalom said to him, this is what Ahithophel has advised. Should we follow his advice? If not, what do you say? Hushai said to Absalom, this time the advice that Ahithophel has given is not good. You know, Hushai continued, that your father and his men are courageous fighters, and they are as desperate as a bear in the wild, robbed of her whelps. Your father is an experienced soldier, and he will not spend the night with the troops. Even now he must be hiding in one of the pits or in some other place, and if any of them fall at the first attack, whoever hears of it will say, a disaster has struck the troops that follow Absalom. And even if he is a brave man with the heart of a lion, he will be shaken, for all Israel knows that your father and the soldiers with him are courageous fighters.
Yeah, so Hushai's counter argument, and again, Hushai probably knew, oh yeah, this is good advice. And I better foil this advice because this is David's done. If he gets attacked right now, David's done. So he has to come up with a counter argument, right? His counter argument's a great counter argument. He doesn't say something stupid. He actually says something brilliant, which is the truth. And Absalom knows it's the truth, which is that David knows how to fight like guerrilla fighting. And David right now is probably not even with his army, the army you think. You're going to attack the wrong people. They're going to get killed. David's going to get away, and you're going to look like an idiot. You'll look like someone who doesn't know how to fight. And everybody, if you mess up now, Absalom, no one's going to trust you in the future. This is your first chance. You screw this up and everyone thinks you're an idiot. Now, all of that is all true, except we know that Hushai only said that to protect David. Absalom.
But you also remember what we mentioned earlier, that David has the better fighters.
David does have better fighters, and Absalom knows that. Everything that Hushai said was true, except for the important part, which is that he's there to protect David, and he knows that David right now is not. He lied about one critical thing, which is David is with his troops right now. David hasn't gone into hiding yet. Remember, there's going into hiding, and then there's going into hiding. David right now has not done what Saddam Hussein did or Gaddafi did, which is, when you first go into hiding, you might go into hiding like King David, and this really happened. We just saw it happen. I mean, Saddam Hussein's situation was not even 20 years ago. Gaddafi's situation was like 10 years ago. This is what happens when people get deposed. When they first get deposed, they might go out with an army. But if the army is with them all the time, they're a target. And if they really are trying to hide, they got to go in disguise and blend in and not be with an army. So Hushai has said that David's already done that. David's already gone into hiding on his own. He doesn't have, you're wrong. He's not with his army right now. You can't fight him because you don't know where he is. That's not true. I mean, and Hushai is not 100% maybe sure that happened, but he's pretty sure because what he's willing to do right now is basically say, Well, I don't think David's done that yet. David just left. I was with him. I saw him. He had the troops with him. But if I can convince Absalom not to do this now, then I buy David some time. And so he did lie about that. But everything else he said was either true or completely plausible, right? So even his lie is completely plausible. So it's a really good idea. If you're gonna lie, make your lie plausible. Don't come up with some crazy stuff and say, well, David's already has an alliance with the Ammonites, and he's already with the Ammonites, and we already like that's plausible, but it's not likely. We know that David just fought a war with the Ammonites. Like, then your lie starts to I sniff out that lie, right?
Stick as close to the truth as you can.
Yeah, and that's what he does. And if he knows, what he does know is that David is with the army right now. So he did lie. Now the problem, of course, is that Hushai has also attacked Ahithophel, because he said, yeah, Ahithophel is usually right, but he's not right now.
That's what David wants him to do.
And that's exactly what David had said. I want you to undermine Ahithophel. You got to undermine Ahithophel. So as much as he's saving David, he's also doing something else, which is undermining Ahithophel. This is critical. And so he also gets at Absalom's weakness too, which is Absalom being the new king, the new heir apparent, now king, right? What does he play on his vulnerability, which is if you screw up, no one's going to believe you, right? They will say the disaster has struck those who follow Absalom. You don't want to be on the wrong side, because again, there's another issue, which is who is God really picked? If Absalom screws up, and Absalom knows Absalom knows this. This was his idea. He didn't go to God and say, God, is it time for me to be king? Absalom did what he did. So Absalom in the back of his mind has to be wondering, do I have God's blessing here? Now he does have the ark, which is probably given him a little sense of confidence. But the ark didn't leave, because if the ark had left, then maybe Absalom would have not had that confidence. Right now, maybe he has a little bit of confidence that things are going his way, that things have gone my way so far. Because so far, everything seemed to have gone in Absalom's direction. He walked right into this. And remember, when David sent back the ark, all he did was continue to bolster this false sense of security that his son has, which is that God must be with me. Everything's falling into place. If I continue just to
False confidence.
yeah, just to do what I think, hey, everything's lining up right, I can play this out. And again, so David just used the weakness that he knows Absalom has, which is he thinks everything's going his way, and that he can't afford to make a mistake. And so David does something which is what he always does, which is that he gambles, he risks everything on this, which is, I'm going to give him the ark. I'm going to give him Hushai. I'm going to give him everything, because what I'm really going to do is plant the seeds for his own downfall by his overconfidence, by having someone in the inner circle. And so David is able to essentially gamble with everything. And what he does is he essentially has to give up his own pieces. He has to give up his own chess pieces in order to do that. The ark, Hushai, I mean, he goes in with less stuff because he needs that stuff on that side. So it's really, really, really an amazing strategy. And it shows David's willingness and risk taking, which you have to have. At some point, that's what makes David
Huge risk for David.
huge risk. And David is that risk taker. David is willing to risk everything, always. So there's Hushai's counter advice. So this is actually the rest of it.
So I advise that all Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, as numerous as the sands of the sea, be called up to join you, and that you yourself march into battle. When we come upon him in whatever place he may be, we'll descend on him as thick as dew falling on the ground, and no one will survive, neither he nor any of the men with him. And if he withdraws into a city, all Israel will bring ropes to that city and drag it stones as far as the riverbed until not even a pebble of it is left.
So Hushai's also going to give his advice for what to do. Because he can't just say, don't attack him now. No, his advice is, let's get a big army, huge army together, and we'll go after everyone. We'll go after him as a country. And what he's saying, yeah, you'll be in the, and you'll be there. Don't go out without, they gotta go out with you. And the whole army, we're gonna show everybody that everybody's against David. Everybody, everyone from one end of the country to the other is gonna go out and battle against David. We're gonna run this guy completely out of town. We're gonna kill him. Everyone's gonna be part of it. Think about how wonderful that's gonna be. Now, of course, that's gonna take time. That's gonna allow David to regroup and to get free. He buys David that time. And everything he said makes sense. It's not an implausible thing. He appeals to Absalom's vanity. He appeals to this idea of getting everybody on the same side. Let's get everybody together. Let's make this a unified cause. It'll bring everyone together, getting rid of David. And if guy goes into a city, we'll just tear that city apart. Think about how powerful that is. What a message was that? There's no place for David to hide out. All right. What's Absalom? He's got Hushai's advice. He's got Achitophel's advice.
Absalom and all Israel agreed that the advice of Hushai, the Archite, was better than that of Achitophel. The Lord had decreed that Achitophel's sound advice be nullified in order that the Lord might bring ruin upon Absalom. Then Hushai told the priests Zadok and Abiathar, "This is what Achitophel advised Absalom and the elders of Israel. This is what I advised. Now, send at once and tell David, do not spend the night at the fords of the wilderness, but cross over at once. Otherwise, the king and all the troops with him will be annihilated."
Yeah, so Hushai is the one who wins out. And it says that,
Wouldn't have been a story if, no.
yes, but God, this was God got involved in this too. God pushed him a little bit.
Yeah.
Pushed Absalom into that side, so that Achitophel wouldn't be listened to. And of course, what does Hushai have to do? He has to get word back to David. Now, I bought you some time. This is what Achitophel did, but he listened to me. But get out of here. Yeah, get out of here. And again, I bought you some time.
What is this crossover we're talking about?
The Jordan. Get on the other side of the Jordan. Don't wait at the Jordan. Get over. Get on the other side. But that's not the end, because this is what we're going to finish with today.
Jonathan and Ahimaaz were staying at En-Rogel, and a slave girl would go and bring them word, and they in turn would go and inform King David, for they themselves dared not be seen entering the city. But a boy saw them and informed Absalom. They left at once and came to the house of a man in Bahurim who had a well in his courtyard. They got down into it, and the wife took a cloth, spread it over the mouth of the well, and scattered groats on top of it, so that nothing would be noticed. When Absalom's servants came to the woman at the house and asked where Ahimaaz and Jonathan were, the woman told them that they had crossed a bit beyond the water. They searched, but found nothing, and they returned to Jerusalem.
Wow. So this whole plan almost got uncovered. The fact that David had spies inside the capital almost got uncovered. Again, we don't know the names of these people. We don't know the names, but these people helped save David's life and David's plan. What it also tells us is that this type of detail doesn't seem to have been from a made-up story. There's no need to tell the story unless it really happened.
Somehow someone has to tell the story of Absalom. That's-
Correct, but nobody needed to tell this little story of how this almost got uncovered.
Right.
That's why when I read this story, I come away with, no, this is too detailed. Because, like, yeah, this totally makes sense that they almost found out. But this kind of things happen.
What's the roads?
That's great, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the stuff that they feed to animals.
Okay.
When Absalom's servants came to the woman at the house and asked where Ahimaaz and Jonathan were,
Yeah,
I read that already. After they were gone, Ahimaaz and Jonathan came up from the well and went and informed King David. They said to David, "Go and cross the water quickly, for Ahithophel has advised thus and thus concerning you." David and all the troops with him promptly crossed the Jordan, and by daybreak, not one was left who had not crossed the Jordan. When Ahithophel saw that his advice had not been followed, he saddled his ass and went home to his native town. He set his affairs in order, and then he hanged himself. He was buried in his ancestral tomb.
Wow.
No one's gonna listen to me, I'll show you.
So, lots of stuff there. We're gonna finish with that now. Ahithophel was now frustrated. So not only did David get to live, didn't even buy time for him to get out, escape. But Ahithophel now is out of the picture. And they took Ahithophel out. So the strategy of getting Ahithophel out of the, out of the inner circle of Absalom was now done. This was the real other victory here, which is that Hushai was able to do what he was essentially there, what David wanted to have happen, which is to get rid of Ahithophel's powers. Get rid of Ahithophel being a factor. He just took him out. So if Ahithophel is the queen or the bishop on the chessboard, they just got rid of another real powerful. So the sacrifice or the risk that David made just got paid off for those who follow chess or strategy, whatever you want to say, that the risk just paid off. Not having Hushai with him was a risk, but Hushai just obliterated his counterpart, if you will, Ahithophel. So now Ahithophel's gone, and now the main guy who's going to be there in the inner circle
He's
is
their
Hushai,
guy.
is their guy. So it's an amazing opportunity, and it was
Mission Impossible.
yes. It's actually like another movie that's on Netflix right now, which my wife saw in England about, well, whatever, a month ago. It's Operation Mincemeat.
Like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
Yes. Yes. It's all about the games that espionage that goes on with espionage. But this Operation Mincemeat is based on a true story of how the English made the British think that made the Germans think that the landing of the invasion of Europe, which took place before D-Day, the invasion of Sicily, was actually going to be in Greece. And they did that by taking a body and basically having it wash up ashore in Spain so that the Germans would get it and then report it back that the landing was happening in Greece, put all their troops at Greece, and then the British and Americans could land at Anzio in Sicily and be able to get the jump on and invade Europe through there. That landing was critical and ended up, the Italian invasion ended up getting bogged down in the Alps, but that was, we're talking about D-Day, but the from the north, but the southern flank, getting the Germans to have to pay attention to Italy ended up being one of the key parts of the war. So Operation Mincemeat's out. It's interesting too, because one of the main guys, the main guy behind the plan was a guy named Ewan Montague. He's actually a Jewish guy. It's an interesting story. It's a great cast. Colin Firth, a bunch of other British people that you've seen, Kelly MacDonald, Scottish. But anyways, it's good. It's definitely worth a watch, but it's about those kind of those things that go on in battle where, again, sometimes it's not just about your forces, it's about espionage, and it's about, again, in the background there is the story of Enigma and how the British had cracked the German codes, which is the imitation game, and which already been made into a great movie about Turing and about the what went on in Bletchley, the early British espionage and beginnings of computers. And again, part of this story is that Ian Fleming, who worked for the British intelligence at the time, would of course go on to create James Bond. But there's a couple cool little James Bond references in Mincemeat, Q Branch, and some other stuff for James Bond fans. But anyways, this is a story of espionage that we just read. And it ends with the guy literally hanging himself because he was humiliated. He was right. He knew he was right. He knew that his advice was the advice that Absalom should have taken, and yet he wasn't listened to. And so what can he do now? He killed himself, which is kind of amazing because it's essentially his way of getting out of the war. It's not condemned. I would definitely say it's not celebrated, but he's buried. So it leads us to believe that I have not been the only person who ever was hanging himself. It also has obviously some interesting precursors, foreshadowing, if you will, to the story of Jesus, because Judas hangs himself after he betrays, or is caught, not caught, but after Jesus is caught. He hangs himself, rather, once he gets paid, he hangs himself anyways. So the similarities in the Jesus story seem to be, again, this story happened first. So a lot of people say that that's based on, the Judas story is based on Achitophel. And look, I mean, it's very, the way that it's described is so matter of fact, right? He takes his ass, goes back home to Gilo, puts his affairs in order, and then kills himself. And then is buried. It's just like boom, 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 boom. This is what he did. And David, this is a huge break for David, but it's a weird story because part of the story, at least the way David tells it, is one of the key reasons why he survived was because this guy died and this guy committed suicide. And he's not around Absalom anymore to give him his sage advice. So again, Achitophel is considered in Jewish history and even by the rabbis for being a guy who literally has divine powers when it comes to knowing what to do. But if he's not going to be listened to, and as he realizes now, he's chosen the wrong side, because there's a certain kind of there's a certain kind of resignation on his part, which is, I'm doomed. It's over. It's over now. I picked the wrong side. God must have frustrated my plans. I'm taking myself out right now. And again, I'm not encouraging that kind of behavior, but there is this way that it's laid out in the Bible, which is, it's over. So we'll pick it up next week, verse 24, where David is now on the run. But this is a critical moment in David's.
Well, right now, David doesn't know this happened.
Not yet,
Right.
but he does know that Achitophel does know.
Oh, he knows that, right,
Yeah,
that they didn't listen to him.
yeah. So David now knows that, oh wow, this is I have a shot.
Right.
Because Achitophel is not being listened to. Now again, does he know yet that Achitophel, like how long does it take for him to get word? We would assume that he does now know that it's,
It's not a very big country.
No, he's gonna, we assume that Achimaaz and Jonathan are gonna
But
get
they
orders.
didn't have Twitter, so.
No,
No, but he
they
had,
didn't have carrier.
he didn't have, he had Achimaaz and Jonathan were outside the city getting messages to him. So
Right.
That's true.
he does have these
Yeah.
guys that are part of his spy network that are getting messages to him. So again, there's just such a real, this is like reportage. I mean, this is like somebody wrote this down as it happened. That, I mean, even like, if it was just gonna say that Achitophel went home and killed himself, but he puts his affairs in order and he hangs himself, it's like, it's just too detailed. So, I don't know, this is one of those
You
stories.
could also say that it's so detailed that it was written after the fact, when they had time to fill in the blanks.
Maybe, but we don't have stories like this.
How do we know that he went home and?
Because somebody in the inner circle, spilled the beans, and maybe it was Hushai, maybe it was somebody who was part of
Someone's
this.
followed him and helped him get his
Look, he
affairs.
put his affairs in order, so his family knew. I mean,
Yeah,
somebody,
that's true.
somebody,
This
like,
is
people
buried
knew.
Isn't, that's true.
Yeah, he's buried in the family too, which again, seems to imply that people who killed themselves didn't have an issue getting where they were gonna get buried. Now you could say, well, he's the big guy, he's the big counselor, but he gets buried with his family. That's what it says. He didn't get buried outside like they did for a long time with people who committed suicide in Judaism. He doesn't seem to have that issue. This King Saul is mortally wounded. One could make the argument it's euthanasia. He's gonna die anyways. He doesn't want to die and he doesn't want to be tortured by the Philistines. That's a different situation. That's like falling on a grenade or taking cyanide as you're about to be captured by the Nazis, whatever. See that in the movies. This guy, he didn't have to die. He went home and killed himself. So this is the most blatant example of suicide that we have in the Bible. Achitophel. It's difficult to make, and again, I want to be very careful. I'm not giving people, permission to go and commit suicide. But I will say that it's very difficult to say that the Bible gives a harsh sentence on this. He's wrong, he's bad, he was on the wrong side. We all know that. There's no, and again, maybe that's why there is no condemnation of what he did. But there is no condemnation about what he did. He didn't say God was mad at him for committing suicide, or that he didn't get buried.
Well,
He didn't
because
get a proper burial.
it was almost an honor, so it's almost an honor suicide.
Okay, maybe.
See, I look at it differently.
But he didn't have to commit suicide. He decided to go home and he hung himself.
I
He
mean,
wasn't
he
dying.
said, it's like, no one's gonna listen to me, so, I'm just gonna go commit suicide.
I guess, but I mean, all I'm saying
Way I
is,
look at it.
okay, but the Bible doesn't give it does not say, and the guy did a horrible thing by committing suicide. There is no judgment on what he did. That's all I'm saying. So the reason I'm saying it is because we know that Judaism frowns on suicide. We also know that Judaism has taken a little different take on it as we now know more about mental health.
But it's not as bad as the Catholics.
No, but you used to not be able to be buried inside the cemetery.
Well, that's how
You were-
Catholics are today.
You were buried, right? But you weren't buried in the main part of the cemetery. You were buried on the outside of the cemetery, which was disrespectful. Today, that's not the case. But it's difficult to base it on the Bible, is all I'm saying. It's difficult to look at what the Bible said about what Achitophel did and to say that, again, it's honorable, it's an honor, it's an honorable death. Fine, but how's this different than ritual seppuku? I don't see it any different. This doesn't seem to me like Jewish behavior, but it's not condemned. So is this a one-off kind of thing? Maybe, but it is what it is. You just read it in the Bible. Goes home, sets his stuff in order, and then gets buried. And he's still buried. So it's a weird way to end. Not necessarily the happiest way to end, but of course, as we know, this is all part of David's. Well, actually, you can read this last part. David had reached Mahanaim when Absalom and all the men of Israel with him crossed the Jordan. So David is at least in a safer place now. When we return and come back and read next week.
Then you can see what happened.
All right, everybody. We will see you next week, God willing, if not tomorrow. Thank you, Rosemary, for
Thank
reading
you. Bye, everybody.
today. Take care, everybody.
Go to the game tonight?